Well, again, thrilled to have you all. And I'm going to do my best to be a host, a good host, for our guest, Camille Winnie. I'm going to bring up just some slides and talk through this uh, information, and then we'll just go back to this gallery view, and we'll just have an interview, question by question, and then I'm going to open up for all of you to ask your questions. So it'll probably be 30 minutes of interview, and then 15 minutes of question and answer with a little wrap up. Sound okay? Yeah, so this is all about building partnerships through collaboration. And I'll tell you, in the world of nonprofits, if you don't have the skill, you are up a creek without a paddle.
It's important.
And if you do have the skill, you are producing new community value, like Camille is doing, not only with the Green Phoenix Farm, but now the Other Side Village. And I'll have her explain more of that. But we have here the director of community outreach at the Other Side Village in Salt Lake City, Utah. And I'm just thrilled to have her as part of Eden Streets. She's actually on our advisory board. So I get to tap on her knowledge and wisdom regularly. So thank you, Camille. So just a little bit about Eden Streets to make sure we're all grounded. And for those who may be listening who aren't aware, Eden Streets is an association of farmers with social missions. And we function at two levels. We function at the association level, where we are defining a new profession for farmers so that they can use farming to actually help people relaunch their lives. And to do that, there's a huge body of knowledge, not just the farming stuff, but how do you work with people in a way that it gives them the freedom and the power to recreate themselves by connecting them with nature and the farming process and experience. So that's what we're about. And we educate our members through webinars, farm visits, conferences, so that we can create farms everywhere that cultivate vibrant and connected communities. And our mission is to empower communities to grow food, jobs, connections, and hope through farming. So that's a big mouthful. It's worth a lifetime of work and more. And what we're doing most recently is working with the city of Ogden at the city level to establish a farm. And that's why this call is so important. Being successful establishing these farms with social missions means you don't own the land. So you've got to get to know landowners, whether that's the city or private enterprises or whoever, and communicate the value of this and engage the fundraisers to make that farm a reality. And that's what I'm in the middle of here in Ogden, Utah. We facilitate contract leases and we foster community partnerships. So that's why this webinar is so relevant to us today. And so I'm going to read a little introduction about Camille. You've seen the email invite, and then we're going to go through the interview for about 30 minutes. I have a set of questions, and then we're going to do Q&A and a wrap up and a little poll at the end. Okay, everybody good so far? Okay, so Camille has spent 10 years working for the Salt Lake Downtown Alliance, an affiliate of the Salt Lake Chamber of Commerce, in a variety of roles, including Director of Business and Community Relations and Director of Community Services. In 2016, after a decade with the Downtown Alliance, Camille transitioned into a consulting role with the Downtown Alliance for an additional 5 years, and also worked with other related community partners on issues surrounding homelessness. And I think
Really?
that's a real comment. Was there a question there? Okay, if you can put yourself on mute just while I go through this, that would be great. So Camille played a key role in developing several programs serving homeless individuals and the surrounding business community, including a transitional job program called the Clean Team that employed homeless individuals to do trash pickup and other maintenance tasks in the Rio Grande neighborhood of Salt Lake City, and its sister traditional job training program called Green Team, which came just after that. This program employs homeless women in an urban farm setting to grow produce for the local Title I after-school programs. While in this program, participants receive ongoing job and life skill training and also one-on-one mentorship. So that's kind of the magic of this configuration, that we're empowering people while we're growing food. Camille, with collaboration of the Salt Lake City Civil Network, helped to organize the Project Homeless Connect, an annual homeless services fair in partnership with Salt Lake City that was modeled after the original Project Homeless Connect in San Francisco. Camille also served as managing director of the Salt Lake Civil Network and also played a key role in organizing the annual TEDx Salt Lake City event over the last several years. Finally, Camille joined the Other Side Village team in 2021 after spending the last 2 years advocating and building support for building a tiny home village for the chronically homeless in Salt Lake, patterned after Community First Village in Austin, Texas. Camille is passionate about creating effective solutions to address homelessness in the community and is excited to join forces with the Other Side Academy on this important endeavor. So thank you, Camille. Welcome to our webinar. Is there anything you'd like to add to my introduction here that helps us understand your journey and how you got to where you are?
Sure. I can give a little background and just explaining kind of how all those things you just mentioned came about. And I was working for the Downtown Alliance, as you mentioned, and was the director of business and community relations. And we were having a lot of complaints from our constituents, the property owners in the downtown Salt Lake City that we served. And that was who essentially pays the tax assessment that funds our organization. And our role at that time was to provide marketing, event production, economic development, and promotion, basically to get people to visit downtown. And that was paid for through these the assessment to these property owners. And they were very concerned about all the things that were taking place in our downtown. As many downtown all over the country experience a lot of concentrated unsheltered homelessness in their downtown areas or in their business districts. And we were having the exact same problems, a lot of loitering, panhandling, trash, human waste, all kinds of problems, and criminal drug use, drug dealing, and there just really wasn't any organized efforts to address them. The police were often looked at as the only resource to address those problems, and the police department's point of view was, we can't arrest our way out of this problem. And so there was a lot of people saying, not my job, not my job. It's not our problem, not our fault. And
that sounds very familiar.
that was the culture at the time, really. But everybody agreed there was a problem and it needed to be addressed. And so we convened a group of people. We called it a safety and security summit. And we invited everybody from the social service community, the city folks, the police department, as well as property owners and business owners. And we convened this group to meet and discuss these challenges. And from there, we basically gave everybody an opportunity to vent and tell us what they felt was the problem. And so we kept a list of all these challenges that they were bringing to us. And then we met again in 2 weeks later to then we categorized all those problems and challenges that they brought to our attention, and came up with kind of some key areas that needed to be addressed. And then we came back to them and said, okay, what are your ideas? How would you, what do you think we should do about these problems and these issues? And so we got a, basic brainstorming session, and many of the things that came out of that were, we need to provide employment, we need to provide better sanitation, we need to provide job opportunities, we need to provide, some street outreach, we needed better safety and security, we needed a lot of different things. And so from there, we created a list of kind of our wishes, and we completed that meeting. And that was as far as my boss at the time had planned. And we took that list of suggestions of things that we should do to fix it. And we left that meeting, and he handed me the stack of notes and said, "We'll see what you can do about this." And so I was like, oh, wow, okay, solve homelessness, I can do that. And so
Camille, just to interject a little bit, there's a magic in what you just said in terms of asking them, what do you think you need to do to solve this problem? In other words, you don't come in as the know-it-all, hey, I got a solution for it. You help them be engaged in the creative solving process. Any comments about that?
Yeah. And so, that really started, and from that last group, we did break it into kind of some key areas, and we asked for one person to chair that committee, that subcommittee. So we got volunteers within that group of people. Who wants to work on this issue? Who wants to work on this issue? And so that was all the structure I had, was a list of ideas of things we could do, and then some volunteer committee chairs to oversee this group of all these concerned people to help figure out solutions. And so I worked on, the first thing I did was just go out and try to understand what the problems were. I had a good friend who was one of the VPs at Volunteers of America, and they had a street outreach program. And I asked him if I could just go out with them and spend a day with them doing out on the streets in person. And so I spent a day with them, just going from all the different places and meeting with the different people they met with. And it really was an eye-opener for me, because it was the first time I really got to see what was happening from this perspective of people who were experiencing it. Not from if an organization or a property or business owner, but from the people who are homeless, their perspective of what they were experiencing. And it was very eye-opening, and pretty quickly I understood why we had the problems we had. And, and that the business community, or just the general public, kind of has this idea of, why don't they just not do that? Why don't they just behave better? Why don't they just stop doing, X, Y, and Z? Right. And it's really kind of a narrow way of thinking, because if you don't really understand why they're in the situation they're in, then, once you do that, you realize they really have the deck stacked against them. And so really just set out trying to figure out how I could address the challenges those people were facing. So if they didn't have a bathroom, and they didn't have a place to store their things, and they didn't have employment opportunities, and they didn't have just basic human needs met, they were going to continue to do what they were doing. It's all they were just surviving. There really wasn't anything more that they could accomplish in a day. They were exited from the shelters every morning at 7 a.m. with all of their belongings to go outside and wait outside till the evening when they were allowed back in. So you have all these people, and there's no bathrooms in the area. There's no trash cans. So of course we have trash everywhere. We have human waste everywhere, and people are, you wonder why these problems are happening. And it's like, well, maybe it's our fault.
Why didn't we think of that?
Yeah, no wonder we have these problems. And that was the biggest eye opener. And so we started working on these different core issues, and sanitation was a big one. And just general cleanliness, because there's a lot of trash, and, and create employment. So we had the idea to create employment by the people who were experiencing homelessness, residing at these shelters that were all in one area, and that we could have them be part of the solution. Not only could we try to address their challenges, but we could have them help solve the problem. And so we did this approach. The first thing that we worked on was creating a clean team to address the cleanliness. And we created this subcommittee. We invited our local council member who was over that area to join that committee. And we started brainstorming of things we could do. And so over a few months, we really came up with some ideas of how we could create jobs at the same time that we could, clean things up. And
Right.
so we came up with a plan to create this employment program called
Just
the.
a little interjection there.
Mhm.
Kudos that you involved a government leader, a local government leader,
It's
so that
critical.
there was always somebody to represent you to the council, to the city, to the community. Yes. So sorry to interject, but I think that's a really key point there.
It is, it really is. And I'll talk more about that later, but you're exactly right. That was a critical factor in this and future things. So I already had a relationship with our council member, but this took it to a new level. And so we got his support in coming up with a solution. We asked the city council, because they are the ones that determine the budget. We asked them for funding to put city trash cans, install them all around this kind of 10-block area where all the social services were in our west side of our downtown. And we asked for funding to create this pilot job training job program, which would provide training with an employer who specializes in hiring people with barriers to employment. And so that was one of the first partners, and then of course the city. And so he liked the idea and he advocated for us with other council, and we're able to get that funding. So our very first program that they funded and said yes to was the clean team. We installed a few dozen trash cans throughout the neighborhood that were permanently affixed, and that this clean team would not only go around picking up trash, but would empty and keep those maintained every day. So we started out with 5 days a week, 6 hours a day, 3 shifts. And then over time that expanded to being 7 days a week, and actually 2 shifts and then to 3 shifts. So that was the first thing that we did. And then we started working on creating bathroom access. So we looked for where are people allowed to use the bathroom, and we realized there was very, very little access for folks. And so we started looking at this idea of installing permanent outdoor restrooms that would be in that area. So people would have a bathroom that was close by that could be maintained and kept clean and safe, and to be easily accessible. Because when we did an inventory of what was available to people, I realized really quickly that what we were expecting was just inhumane. Nobody allows them to use a restroom anywhere. They're, customers only. Even the bus station that was close by wouldn't let them use the restroom. So only public buildings that were often many blocks away were the only access available to them during a regular day. And that's just Monday through Friday, business hours. And so it was just very obvious why sidewalks and alleys and grassy patches were being used as restrooms, because there simply wasn't anything else available to people. And we wonder why that was happening. It was just glaringly obvious that this was a civic problem that needed to be solved. And so go
if
ahead.
I could, just with the success, looking at our time here, just with the success of that clean team, where did the idea of the green team come from? How did that eventually?
But it kind of came on the heels of this. So we did this, the bathrooms and the clean team. And so I started looking at how to expand the activities for people that were meaningful, that were created. It beautified the area, because we had a lot of, we had a lot next door to the shelter that was just dirty and full of weeds and trash. And that was my first idea, is like, what if we turned that into a community garden? And then it would give people something productive to do during the day that was healthy and life affirming, and it would beautify that area. And so started working on that idea. And as many of these ideas, you start with one idea, and then as you work on it with people and you brainstorm, it morphs and changes. And so then we were looking at another piece of property where the Green Team Farm is currently, that was just a few blocks away. And it was a city-owned piece of property that was historically a garden. It was fenced, it had sprinkler system in it, it had a small kind of broken down greenhouse. And so it seemed like a really obvious, it was just a no-brainer that was the perfect site.
Yeah.
It's just kind of what you're looking at behind you. And it's
Right.
an acre and a half of this just undeveloped land. It's beautiful. And this actually, too bad you don't have the before picture. It was just a big ugly dirt lot.
Yeah, just if I could interject there, I think a point that you brought out was let it morph.
Mhm.
You can come up with one idea, but don't try to control it. Let it morph so that all the people feel like they have equal input, and people get excited when they are heard, right? I think that's a key to this collaboration.
Well, and your later ideas that come through iteration are often better than your first idea. So it just improve it over time. So I really wanted to create both activity And, the idea of giving some people a place to actually garden, if you're all involved in gardening, how healing working in the soil is, being outside. It wasn't just, let's give them a job. Let's do something that is healing, that is nurturing, and that beautifies the whole area. So it's creating jobs, beautifying the area, and creating purpose for people and giving them this beautiful environment. And so started to work again, approached the Advantage Services, who was doing the employment project we just discussed. And they said, yes, this sounds great. We'll do it. We'll expand and create another job program. Talked with our council members. We had a different council member at the time when actually Luke was still in when we very first started this, and then another one came on board. And so I started meeting with council members and saying, could we potentially have access to this land? It was a redevelopment agency, a division of the city that owned the land. And, slated for redevelopment at some point, but it had been sitting fallow for, 10 years since they bought it, and there was no plans for it. And so we just started having those exploratory meetings with the city. And then I approached the folks at Wasatch Community Gardens because I knew that I couldn't manage and run a garden myself. So I needed to have a partner who that was in their wheelhouse, and that was something that would work for them. And so started talking with Ashley, who was the director at Wasatch at the time. And she had wanted to do something like this, some kind of community garden like this for some time. And so she was immediately, yes, let's do it. And so we started planning together and then really working closely with the city and the RDA. And because of previous other relationships and information I knew about this piece of property, we were able to approach it in a way that we got a yes, because they'd told several other people no previously on that land. Other people come to them with ideas for gardens and they'd said no. And because I knew this information, because of my involvement in the community, I was able to approach it in a way that they would be open to.
So just to recap, what I hear you saying is you were aware of the constellation of nonprofits in the Salt Lake area. Right. And you had a problem and you said, which nonprofit can really address this issue? It was obvious you had a relationship with the executive director, and that led to a whole nother dimension of the work.
So yeah, it's really just identifying who can help solve this, who are the people that can bring this together, because my role is the connector, I'm not the one actually running things, but I'm the one who helped bring the pieces together and the different organizations and come up with the idea and then execute it. But if I had to do it all myself, it wouldn't work. Yeah. So we presented that plan. I met with 2 at a time with the council members, presented the idea and the concept. I said, this is what I'm proposing. We get the permission to use this land. We're doing the fundraising. Essentially, all I need from you is a yes and a little bit of funding. And so I present them with a solution. And because we'd had this success already with the other things where they had seen a real improvement, they already had some buy-in. They already
credibility, right?
Right. And they were able to say, okay, yeah, this is a good idea. And so we moved forward. It was really fairly easy from that point because of the previous success. And all council members were in support of it. We were able to get the RDA's support for, letting us have a short-term lease on this piece of property, with the promise that we wouldn't dig in our heels and try to fight them when they were ready to, when they needed to redevelop it and would want to kick us out. And so we promised, not to fight back later, and try to keep the property, but we expected we'd get 5 years there. So we just made all those, basically those meetings with everybody, got them all to agree. Then we just went through the legislative process, got everything approved, got the funding approved, got the land approved, and then we were able to launch.
May I pause you on the funding part? Because that is typically the trigger, right? That's the big deal. When people are asked to open their wallets, especially if things are already budgeted for,
right?
How do you get them to change their mindset a little bit? Or maybe I say expand would be a better word, to say, let's solve a problem here, mutual problem, and we're saving expenses somewhere else. Can you talk about how you were able to negotiate, funding for this?
Well, with all these things, we basically have to ask the right people for the money. You have to ask it for people that traditionally give money. So we worked with a number of banks, that do CRA lending, which is, or CRA programs, which are it's the Community Reinvestment Act. They're required to reinvest their profits into the community. And most of them they choose the area of economic development or job creation. And many have a focus on homelessness. So you basically, there's a system and a process for applying for this funding from most of these banks. And, and I had some folks who knew those, I knew somebody who knew somebody. So it's like when those connections and this person, so they make an introduction, they make an introduction. And so you're just able to make those requests from those organizations. And also then from the city council, a good portion of the funding came from them. And they were experiencing the same thing we were as an organization of constituents saying, you must do something, that it's out of control. We need help. This homelessness issue is out of control. Why aren't you doing something? And that's kind of common. Everybody tends to blame the government. Well, why aren't you solving this? And so what I did is basically offer them something they could take credit for and say, look, this is what we're doing. And really that's what we intentionally did in the early, and especially with the clean team and the bathrooms and all that. It's like, this is yours. We're doing this for you. We're solving your problem and you can take credit for it. And that's really key. If you're not attached to who gets credit for it and you're solving their problem and they can get the feather in their cap, they're much more likely to do it. And they want, they're motivated to do something. They become council members because they care about their city and they want to make it better. So you offer them the thing that will solve their problem and that will also make them feel good, and then also make their constituents feel good.
Wow. So it's really about
way.
perceiving what their motivations are and making sure you're checking their priority boxes.
Right. You're giving them something they want and that they need, and you present it in such a way. And so it was really, and because of the previous experience with council, was able to say, okay, here's another solution. Will you fund this also? And it was really quite easy the second time. I didn't have to do as much convincing. And so they agreed to letting us use the property and to fund it. And so we were able to get other supplemental funding from these other organizations, CRA banks, like
Right.
Sync Bank financed a chunk of the stuff for the actual farm production. And so both Wasatch Community Gardens and Advantage Services were asking for money. And I really kind of focused on getting the city council to fund that. So together with all these different sources, we were able to fund it. And we began in the summer, mid-summer, August of 2016. And really quickly, we were able to just, bring in the topsoil, put in the garden beds, and sometime you ought to look back at the kind of the stages of the farm. You got to see it in about, I think it's 4th year.
Yeah.
It really developed pretty quickly, and we were able to hire our first cohort of women. In fact, Eve, that you see there just right behind you with the turban around her, she was one of our very first women in the first cohort. And so we were able to launch it fairly quickly just because we already had those relationships built. And so anytime you've done one thing, it's always easier to do the next thing if you've got those relationships already in place. And
may I ask you, this sounds so straightforward and so easy, but there must have been one difficult point in this process. If you were to identify what was one of the most difficult conversations or experiences that you had where you were at your wit's end, just to give us some courage, those who are trying this right now, what would you say?
I hope this doesn't sound too Pollyannish, but I am a firm believer when you're committed, it's actually easy. And I approach it as if I expect it to work and I expect it to be easy. And so there were minor struggles, but there was never a time that I'm never pulling my hair out, never frustrated. To that point, we had some challenges. The biggest challenge was to get the RDA to say yes. The current director had told 3 other people before us no. And he's just the kind of person that liked to say no. It's like, no, we don't want to get anybody on there who's going to then try to fight us and keep the property. And, because we want to redevelop it, even though we have no plans in the near future, we just don't want to be bothered. So I knew that about him. And I knew some of the staff that I had, knew better. And so I started talking with them first and, getting them on board and let them convince their boss that they should do it. And I did all the research, found out the details of all the reasons why they'd said no and why this one didn't go through and this one didn't go through. And so I did my homework first, so I understood what was happening and why, and then approached it of basically giving him a solution. Here's this underutilized piece of property that you get a lot of grief from other people about. It could be used. It could be used for this purpose. It solves a problem for the city. The mayor, the mayor wants it. The city council wants it. We just need you to say yes. And so, and basically he said to his staff when they presented it to him again, I thought we decided not to do anything here, and they said, well, we think we should. And so they convinced him. And so really of just figuring out what the holdup is and why, and understanding that, and then coming at it from another angle, instead of just directly saying, we think you should give us this. And we just approached it in a different way of getting the buy-in of the staff first. And because they'd done this earlier work on it and had considered these other offers and then turned them down, we already kind of knew what we needed, what we shouldn't do and how, basically we should approach it in a different way. So that was probably the biggest challenge right there. And then when we were asking for funding, there was a little bit of a hiccup with when we were working, because the city council and the RDA have their relationship is that the city council members are actually the board of the RDA, although the RDA is a separate organization within the city. So we asked for something in the actual meeting when we were giving our presentation that ruffled some feathers. And it was just because we didn't understand something. So that's important to understand the lay of the land and what the relationships are.
Yeah,
so,
they're like mines that if you don't want to step on those mines.
Yeah, you do not want to bite the hand of the person who's helping you. And so we made a mistake there, and we had one little where we just had to, say our bad, we're sorry, we didn't realize, we weren't trying to. So it's just a matter of, nurturing those relationships and saying sorry or, here's where we made a mistake. And because they still really wanted to see this happen, it just basically needed to be flexible and also, be accountable when you've stepped on somebody's toes and apologize. Yeah. So that was probably the only two things that were tricky at all. Everything else was easy, to be perfectly honest. Yeah. It was, and that is a mindset that, of just trusting that things will, when you really have an idea that feels right and you're committed to it, just having that approach of, I expect this to be easy, and for people to say yes and to have support for it, and really approaching it from that mindset, I think really makes people more inclined to say yes. Yeah. I come out with the expectation that this is wonderful and you're going to like it and you're going to say yes.
And that's because you're so nice. You're a great, fun person to be with. So that, I think your personality really lends to that as well. Question, looking at thinking about our audience here who may not have a farm started, right, who may not work for the Downtown Alliance at time zero. How long does it take to build these relationships? If I were starting from zero, like I'd moved to Ogden, I'm trying to get this farm going, and I realized that relationships is where it's at, one-on-one. Can you give us some guidance as to setting the right expectation in terms of timing to get the ball rolling here?
If you're starting from ground zero with no previous relationships or connections in the community, and you're just right at the beginning, it's going to take longer. If you already have those relationships, of course it's easier because you have, people. But if you don't know anyone, there really are ways that you can begin to get to know people. And I would say my number one approach when I started working at the Downtown Alliance was to say yes to everything, go to everything. I knew when I started, I didn't know anybody. I didn't know who anybody was. And I realized that was an important part of my work there, that I needed to know who the, people in charge, the people in power, the movers and shakers were. And so I just set a policy of, I would go to everything I could go to. I'd go to every, networking event, every social event, because all these folks were coming to these same things. And so I pretty quickly got to meet and know people. And when you talk about networking, some people approach networking from really kind of like, what can I get out of this? Of, what's your, they just exchange cards, what do you do? And it's just kind of more like a sales pitch relationship. And I did not ever do that. I always just approached those relationships as, hey, I'd like to get to know you, I'd like to be friends. And so, even with council members, even with, different people in different organizations, I always just had the intent to get to know somebody and make a friend. And
Mhm.
it was through those friendships that I was able to get that support for these other things, because they were already a friend. And so I would say that if you're doing that, one of the things you can do is start participating if you have a local chamber of commerce that has some influence, start attending the meetings, start networking. You don't even have to do it with the intent that you're trying to find the one person, but just get to know them first. Go to your city council meetings. They're public meetings. You can go every week. You can get up and give comments. You can, when they break and then they end, they'll talk to people. So you just spend time actually getting to know them, build those relationships before you go and ask them for something. That would be the best approach, is actually to get to know them, have your face be familiar to them. And then when you come to them with this plan and idea, they already know you. They already have they already have some relationship with you. And so that would be, if you're starting from zero, I would say, get involved in any organization that is doing the stuff you want to do that's related, and participate. And just show up and get to know people.
May I add to the Chamber of Commerce and attending there's an area council of governments meeting typically, which
Right.
combines the county and the city. You have your city council meetings. Then you also have nonprofit meetings where you can get to know that constellation of people. And then there's community events, farmers
Absolutely.
markets, whatever, where you just get out there meeting people and being friendly, like you say. That's
Yeah, and I'd say that's the secret to the success, is just getting to know as many people and as many different walks within that community that you can, and just with the objective of getting to know them and making a friend. And you never know where that friendship later on, and you don't do it with the intent of, oh, I'm going to hit them up for something. But if those friendships are genuine, you get a lot of support when you ask for help.
great. I'm looking at our time and our questions. I want to open this up to Q&A. We did talk about funding. We talked about advocating. The cause that you're working with now, the Other Side Village, is in multi-million dollars of donations. And you had to advocate for that village. How did you build support for building a tiny home village for the chronically homeless? Again, is there anything else that you would add that was different from or additive to what you did for the Green Team and the farm?
No, I would say it's actually an extension. The current mayor, the person who ran for mayor, who came on right as I was starting to work on this actively, used to be a city council member. So I already knew her. I already had a relationship with her. She'd already helped. She came to the launch of this garden. She was there for the ribbon cutting. So I already had a track record with her. And in fact, I was, one of the supporters, encouraging her to run and supporting her campaign. And so when she was the mayor, she was the first person I went to, but we had a friendship. I didn't have to just go ask the mayor. I already knew her. And so that was, I didn't have to go through the struggles of getting an appointment with her. I just, hey, can I come see you?
Yeah, what you just said may take 3 years to get to the friendship.
Yeah, right. But you can start, I have been able to get to meet people that I didn't know. So it's not to say you can't do both, but there is tremendous value in getting to know, your community, that your leaders, your mayors, your state legislators, your chamber of commerce, just the people who, are in those positions, and they all know each other. And so if you can get within that kind of community then you just meet more and more, and your network grows along with that. That was very true here in Salt Lake. It's kind of a small network of all the people in leadership, and that are all either affiliated through government or the chamber or the Downtown Alliance. And so it really it extends and expands your network. So knowing her as a council member, then when she became, ran for mayor and became mayor, it was just an easy thing for me to approach her. And, addressing homelessness and creating more housing was one of her main things that she wanted to do. And so I actually had my first meeting with her while she was still in transition, before she actually took office. And then we met again right after, just pre-COVID. So we had plans to we were going to actually take a trip to Austin, take some of the city council members and see it in person, because I wanted to, you know, have her see herself how wonderful this approach was and why we needed it. But then COVID, you know, and that certainly put a damper on taking any kind of trips. And so then later at the end of that 2020, we just, we met again virtually and just worked on convening virtual meetings for kind of the community leaders and movers and shakers, people who'd have ideas about property and funding mechanisms. And so she actually created this because she wanted to promote this idea of creating housing in all different ways. And so she had a series of meetings and invited all these people to come to it. And we were able to have a presentation from Alan Graham, who's the founder of Community First Village. And that's when my friends who I already knew and had a relationship from the Other Side Academy, they ended up getting invited to one of these meetings. And then,
if I could just interject there, I think you're not inviting, having the mayor or the councilwoman or whoever that's leading the charge and do the inviting. I think that's so key, because then people are listening, right?
Right. And that was, you know, and we discussed that, and she said, I'll make the invites and I'll set this up as the mayor's office setting these meetings up. So that made it super easy. And then the academy came to that, to one of the second meeting. And when I saw that they were included in the invite list, I immediately called my friend Dave, the director, and said, hey, I see that you're coming to this, you know. And he said, yeah, the mayor invited us and we wanted to just come see what was happening. And so they got interested in just seeing what was happening, more or less as a supporter. And then after the conclusion of these series of meetings at the end of 2020, they decided they were going to take a trip. Their organization and leadership was going to take a trip to Austin to see Community First Village. They were curious. And they actually had a different working relationship with them through another organization with that founder. And so they said, yeah, we've never been there. We'd like to see it. And so we took a trip and took a few other people with us, and I went along, and with the goal of just getting them as another supporter, another potential friend to support this. And we went and took that, you know, got them to see it in person, to catch the vision, to be excited about it. And we left there and they said, oh, this is wonderful. Yeah, you should do this. And we think it's great. We'll help you any way we can. You know, we're on board to help you. And so, you know, that was just an opportunity to get them engaged. But after coming back from that pretty quickly, they decided they actually wanted to be part of it. And I hadn't asked, I just had said, come and see it, see what you think. Right. And on their own said, oh, we want to help. We want to do this. And you know, by March, we went the end of January, and by March, they, you know, the leadership, the board chair and the CEO approached me and said, and because we already had a long-term relationship, they basically said, you know, can we do this with you? Can we do this together? You can come join our organization. Right. We'll pay you a salary and we'll start working on this immediately. And so then, you know, we were already in with the mayor. And so we had those meetings, you know, pretty quickly, that they were going to be the nonprofit organization to basically be the driving force of this. And, you know, and I was joining forces with them. And it was just, we went to the mayor and she's like, I'm in. So the groundwork was already laid.
Yeah. May I make a point here that you had them have an experience. Yep. They actually saw it firsthand. They felt it. They had the vibe. Right. And that did the marketing for you, right?
It sells itself. And we, you know, really, for these previous things, I always looked for other cities that were doing something like what I wanted to do. And so I would always show examples. This is what, so we showed for the garden, we showed the homeless garden project in California. We were able to show them something. As the
models
point is to say, this is what I'm talking about. This is what we can do here. And it's already successful. So you have an example. If you're starting from nowhere, it's hard to give people the vision. Right. So it is really important to be able to show them something where they can be inspired by. And, you know, the tiny home village in Austin, only thing people need to do to get on board is to see it. And it's just like, oh, well, yeah, of course. And so that's really, I'd say that's an important part of it too, is to have an example that you can point to that is already successful.
Excellent.
You have to be the first one.
Now, thank you, Camille. You've done a great job kind of answering a lot of my questions through natural conversation. I would like, if I could, to open it up to the audience now to ask questions. However, I want to give this one more chance to you to say, is there anything you haven't quite covered that you wanted to really point out before we open it up for Q&A?
I probably just wanted to reiterate one point, because it kind of just puts a cap on what we've been talking about, is you want to make it easy for people to say yes. So often I see within, my experiences working with the community and working with government, is that so often somebody will come complaining to the mayor or to city council, you should do this, you should do that, why aren't you doing XYZ? And that, that's not their role to go in and create things and come up with it. So if you come to people with the solution, you've identified what their problem, the challenge is, that they're already feeling some angst about, and you come with the solution already in place, and you're going to do the work, and you come with a plan and an example, and all they have to do is go like, oh, okay, yeah, I can say yes to that. I can just vote to give you some money. That's all I have to do. So you want to make it easy for them to say yes. You want to make it appealing. You want it to be solving a problem for them. And you want to be the one that is saying, I will do the work. I'm not asking you to do anything except vote yes to give me some money.
And give me some money.
And you present it in a way that, I just need, this is what we're going to do. This is how we're going to do it. This is who is involved. And all we need from you is XYZ. So we'd like to put in a fund, a funding request, because there's a process for all of these things with government. There's a mechanism to actually ask for money, whether it's your state legislature or your city. So there is a process for citizens to request, for basically projects to ask to be funded, but you basically need a council member or a legislator to be sponsoring it. So make that friend first, then make the proposal, and just make it easy, make it wonderful, make it a solution to their problems that solves a community need. And, why would they want to say no? If they're able to figure out how to come up, to fund the money, it's just really easy for them to say yes.
Yes, perfect. Thank you, Camille. This is awesome. I'd like to open it up to those online here. We have about 4 or 5 more minutes, and then we'll do a little wrap up here. But yeah, questions for Camille.
Well, I'm going to just throw in a comment. Camille, I totally agree with you about the bottom-up approach and starting with staff. And in your case, it was starting with staff to win the yes from the top. Mm-hmm. I've seen situations where you may have entree to the top already, but you don't want staff to resent it coming down. And in that case too, I think the bottom-up approach and get the staff to buy in is also important, and that's all. And so kudos to what you've done, and it's really an inspiration. And
yeah,
I think you're exactly right, is approaching so that you have everyone's buy-in, because as a negative staff person can wreak havoc. So that is important.
Thank you, Bill. Anyone else? Question?
I'd like to say the same, Camille. Great work. That's amazing. Very, very informative. Thanks.
Great. I had a question, Camille. Have you ever gotten this not invented here? Like, in other words, you have a solution, mm-hmm. but because they haven't been a part of this developing the solution, and mm-hmm. That they're less open to accept it or receive it. What has that ever happened?
Sure. When it's true. Anytime you do anything, there's almost always someone who disagrees with what you're doing for whatever reason. Whether because it wasn't their idea or they have a different, point of view. In the 15 years total I spent with the Chamber and the Downtown Alliance, I watched a lot of big projects, a lot of big issues that kind of just went through their process of getting done, and people getting on board and things happening, and convention centers getting built and hotels and new malls. And so every project, and railway extensions. So anytime there was a big thing, a big new thing, there's always some element of the community that thinks it's going to cause the end of the world. It's going to be the end of everything as they know it, ruin everything, and so I have seen it with nearly every single thing that I've witnessed go through that process of development. And so you just expect it. And the first thing you can do is try to head it off at the pass. When you know there's somebody who is not going to agree with what you're doing, you go to them first. You explain it, invite them to, participate, give their feedback. And so kind of like with the RDA who was already resistant, we set out to win them over first instead of just going in right in guns blazing. So I'd say that's true of, and we spent it the first, 6-8 months with the village, just meeting with people before we asked for any money. We just went out talking to people, meeting with leadership in different places, meeting with key players, key donors, government, anybody we could think of that could have a piece of this. We invited them early to come and hear about our idea and to give feedback. And so you can head a lot of it off by just including those who you think could resist or who would have an issue with it. And if you include them from the beginning, then that can, short circuit a lot of resistance. And so, just being willing to listen to what they have to say and take their feedback and, make changes if necessary. But I'd say approach them right off the bat. And sometimes you can't win them over. And sometimes you just have to get through, many of these big projects I mentioned just had to weather the storm. It's a small portion of people who are fighting it and, picketing and whatever they do. But if there's commitment by the people leading it and they just refuse to stop and they just go forward and they don't quit because
I think you said that,
win.
In the book by Michael Abelman about turning the it's Soul Food Street Farms, he goes to the city of Vancouver, Canada. And it's because of a city council member she's like ex-military or whatever. She would not take no for an answer. She just said, we're plowing ahead. This is a good idea. So you need to find those advocates who are really, really pushing this and in the leadership circles, right?
And you need to be committed and you need to believe in what you're doing. And if you have doubts and you're not committed, you will not be able to win anybody else over. So if you're committed and you don't quit, I got a nickname during all this process of doing all these things and winning people over. And I did have some resistance. The bathrooms were not popular, as you can imagine. That I had to fight for. So, but I had the moral high ground. So I just charged, and it's like, you can't stop me. I won't stop. You might disagree, but this is the right thing to do for human beings. And you cannot stop me. I refuse to stop.
Because it's based on a good principle, a true principle, right?
Yeah. And so, there was another thing of inspiration. I just remembered, I don't know if you've heard of Ron, what's his name? Guerrilla Gardner. He's got a TED talk he did about farming. And it really, and when I was kind of trying to figure out what to do about the farm, and I saw his video and it just gave me that just little fire of like, yes, and he was just doing gardens in his front and got in trouble with the city and he had to fight it. And now it's turned into this huge, big organization. And he was just determined and he just was kind of had this devil may care. And, and I just love at the end, he said, if you want to meet with me, and we're not going to go sit in some cushy chairs in a boardroom. He says, you come to the garden, you bring your shovel and we're going to plant some shit. Just kind of, just his personality and just that contagious of like, I'm going to do this and you can't stop me. And it really that was an inspiration to me. And it really just solidified what I've always believed, that if you're committed and you don't stop,
the right will prevail, right?
Yeah, you will.
The good thing will happen.
The good thing will prevail as long as if you don't quit, you can give up and then it won't happen. But if you don't give up, it's far harder to resist something. When there's momentum and support for it, you can be just over here making noise, but that little bit of negativity cannot overwhelm all of that forward motion and all that goodwill and all the people who are on board. And so as long as you don't pay too much attention to these little people over here sniping at your heels and you don't let it stop you, it really can't. The power of this little complainer over here can never overpower this big machine that's moving forward.
Great. Any final questions? This has been awesome. There's a lot of secret sauce in what you just shared. it bears re-listening to and taking some good notes. I've been experiencing this for a year in Ogden. I
Mhm.
probably have 2 more years to go till we get this farm rolling. But you are my advocate, my mentor, and I really appreciate your having, what do you call it? Cutting teeth. You've gone through this. You know what you can commiserate with me in my low
Yeah.
valleys, right?
Well, and you're at the beginning of building those relationships in Ogden, and that's what's so important. Hey, I see a familiar face right there.
Yeah, Shannon is on the
Shannon?
call. Shannon is a graduate from our Green Phoenix farm and now concierge at a downtown Marriott in Salt Lake City, Utah. Hi, Shannon.
Hi, guys.
Well, great. The time is up. I would like to use the chat. If you would, that's my poor man's poll. Just put in the chat your comments about this session. If you liked it, what you would change, anything upgrading. We're going to go on a little farmer hiatus since I'm starting my Faircrest farms in the backyard here. We're going to have some webinars in July where we're going to showcase farmers across the country. So that's coming next, but we know that it's planting season and I'm building a greenhouse and we gotta do stuff, right? So with that, Camille, again, thank you for an amazing share today. Thank you, Bill, Scott, Shannon, and Mary, James, and I think it's Sarah from Ogden here with us today to learn about collaboration and the art of building partnerships. I hope you have a great day. Let's make these farms available across the world.